In just a matter of hours, Intel saw a staggering $100 billion in market value wiped out not from a market-wide collapse, but from a quiet, calculated decision made in Beijing. On April 12, 2025, China's Ministry of Industry and Information Technology announced a policy shift that sent shockwaves through the global tech landscape, effectively turning the chip-making giant into a prime casualty of the intensifying US-China tech war. The directive was executed discreetly but with surgical precision. All Chinese government agencies and major state-backed enterprises were banned from purchasing semiconductors from US companies, specifically naming Intel, AMD, and Micron. The move, framed as a step towards securing digital sovereignty and safeguarding China's tech supply chain, directly undermined America's semiconductor stronghold. By the next day, procurement systems were overhauled, and key contracts, including those with China Mobile, State Grid, and server vendors tied to Huawei, were abruptly cancelled. For Intel, which had relied on China for nearly 27% of its 2024 revenue, about $22 billion, the impact was immediate. Its stock nosedived by 18.3% in just 2 days. But this wasn't only about lost revenue. Investors began to brace for a deeper blow, a full-scale decoupling of China from US chipmakers. And perhaps it wasn't just chips that were under attack. Analysts suggest this was a broader, more strategic move, a direct hit on American innovation itself. Geopolitical expert Emily Jin from the Center for a New American Security framed the maneuver not as defensive, but as an intentional act to weaken the foundation of US technological supremacy. It wasn't just about stopping Intel, it was about eroding the very roots of Silicon Valley's dominance. Intel, more than its peers, was exposed. While Nvidia only sourced 19% of its revenue from China, Intel was deeply embedded in China's computing and server infrastructure. This dependency left it vulnerable not just to revenue loss, but to strategic irrelevance. The fallout extended beyond Intel. Major semiconductor ETFs like SOXX and SMH dipped 4.2% and 2% respectively, dragged down by the chip giant's collapse. But this moment didn't come out of nowhere. It was years in the making. Back in 2011, Intel controlled a commanding 80% of the global PC processor market. Fast forward to the end of 2024, and that dominance had eroded to 57%. Repeated delays in the rollout of its 10nm and 7nm chips gave AMD the opening it needed to claw back market share, while companies like Apple and Amazon move forward with their own custom chip solutions. The company's financials were already faltering. A $2.8 billion loss in Q1 2023 ballooned into an $8 billion deficit by Q4 2024. By the time Beijing issued its directive, Intel had already lost its pricing power, its competitive edge, and its once impenetrable position atop the semiconductor world. China didn't just cut off a supplier, it exposed a critical weakness in the American tech machine. And Intel, once the unchallenged king of chips, suddenly found itself in the crosshairs of a much larger geopolitical battle. Doug O'Neill, a chip policy expert at RAND, didn't mince words. Intel's business still relied on an old model of globalization. But that model was crumbling fast, especially after China made a bold move to shut out US tech. And this wasn't just a defensive reaction, it was a sign of a much bigger plan. Leaked documents revealed China's goal. By the end of 2027, it wants all US-made chips out of its critical systems: telecom, energy, and government infrastructure. The initiative, called Clean Silicon, demands that by early 2026, 80% of central government systems must run on Chinese chips. For companies like Intel, this wasn't just about losing a market. It meant being pushed out completely. Analysts say this shift could cost American chipmakers $350 billion. But the real danger? If China proves it can build a chip supply chain without the US, other countries might start doing the same. Beijing wasn't just cutting ties, it was testing a new tech ecosystem for a future without American dominance. And then came the shocker. Huawei, long thought to be weakened by US sanctions, made a surprise comeback. In late 2024, it released a smartphone powered by a 5nm chip made in China using older tech without the advanced equipment everyone thought was necessary. It worked, and it sold over 45 million units in 6 months. While Huawei surged, Intel struggled. Its new Ohio factory was behind schedule, its next-gen 18A chip was delayed, its data center revenue dropped 22%. And while SMIC's revenue jumped 47%, Intel was cutting jobs and losing ground. China had figured out how to make do with what it had and scale it fast. It didn't need US tools to compete anymore. And with state-backed companies like Huawei and SMIC getting billions in support, China was building an entire tech ecosystem that no longer depended on American chips. By early 2025, over 75% of China's key sectors, from telecom to energy, were using local chips. US chip imports to China had dropped from 41% in 2021 to just 28% in 2024. More than half of government contracts were going to domestic companies. The question now isn't if China will replace US tech, it's when. Intel still had hope. The US government was investing big through the Chips and Science Act, sending Intel over $19 billion in funding. It also landed major deals with Amazon and the Pentagon. But progress was slow and the clock was ticking. Intel's Ohio megafab was delayed until late 2026. Meanwhile, TSMC was already ramping up 3nm chip production in Arizona. Intel's losses in China could reach $13.7 billion by 2027, more than any single deal could cover. And consumers were about to feel the pinch. Layoffs hit Intel hard in 2025. Processor shipments dropped. OEMs like HP and Dell prepared to raise prices by up to 17% as Intel struggled with rising costs and reduced output. Cloud computing, servers, AI chips, everything was getting more expensive. Public funding helped, but it couldn't replace lost time or lost markets. Intel's future now hangs in the balance. Its stock is underperforming. Deadlines are being missed, and rivals like Samsung and TSMC are pulling ahead with 3nm and even 2nm chip development. This isn't just Intel's problem. China is changing the rules of the global tech game. It's not about one company anymore. It's about control over the future of computing. As China tightens its grip on rare earths, AI chips, and other key technologies, the US faces a deeper question. Can the country that created the chip era survive being cut off from the supply chains it helped build? That answer could reshape the future of global tech.